Good afternoon. My name is Vonnie Hays-Adams, and I'm the Executive Director of the Merryman Domestic Crisis Center. Today we're here to talk about Love Shouldn't Hurt. We're going to examine a little bit about the national statistics and how this domestic violence has affected our country, how it affects us locally, and more importantly, how it affects individual victims who are served by the Merryman Domestic Crisis Center. I have two special guests with me today. The first one is Merryman Kemp, who is the founder, the president emeritus, and she's going to share with us a little bit about the agency's history, a little bit about where Merryman House is today and her perspective of where we've come from, and then just her overall view of domestic violence and the domestic violence movement in the Purchase area. A little later on, I'm going to introduce you to Jennifer W., who is a victim who's actually received services from the Merryman House. She's been a resident there, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to live free of domestic violence. She's been very successful in doing that for about the past year. About midway through the program, we're going to have for the viewers an opportunity to take a relationship quiz in the privacy of your own home so that you can answer some questions openly and honestly about your current relationship or perhaps one you've had in the past that was either hurtful mentally, physically, or perhaps both, and then what you can do to get out of that relationship, and that you have a choice. You don't have to live in an abusive relationship. I'm going to start out today just by sharing some national statistics just to kind of get the conversation going, and then we'll move to some local ones to talk about where we are today, and then I'm going to let Merryman take over and share with everybody a little bit about the movement of domestic violence and specifically how Merryman House came to be. So I'm going to start with some national statistics, and I know these probably won't surprise Merryman. Perhaps they may surprise some of our viewers. First of all, I'd like to start out with murder victims in this country, and 42% of female murder victims are actually killed by their current or former partners. More than 33% of us as Americans have actually witnessed an incident of domestic violence. So you might take a few minutes to think about maybe things you've heard in a grocery store, a restaurant. 1 in 3 of us have actually seen this happen. Unfortunately, very few of us report it. People ages 16 to 24 are raped and sexually assaulted at rates higher than any other group. And that's about 1 out of every 4 in that age group of 16 to 24. Unfortunately, very few of those are reported. Stalking affects 1.4 million people a year. And this is just to kind of give you a frame of reference as you watch the rest of the show. 4 million women a year are assaulted and beaten by their partners. That's about 1 every 9 seconds in the United States. So as the time that we sit here today, several women will be assaulted by their partner. Every day, 4 women in this country are murdered by their boyfriends or their husbands. The prison term for killing your husband is twice as long as that for killing your wife. And unfortunately, 93% of the women who are currently incarcerated for doing that had actually been battered by the man that they eventually killed. And 67% of them at the time of the murder were actually protecting themselves or their children at that very moment that they committed the murder. Domestic violence is probably not surprising to people who work in a hospital, but domestic violence is the #1 cause of emergency room visits and the #1 cause of women to injuries in the home. 50% of the homeless women and children in this country are homeless because they're fleeing domestic violence. And I think a lot of the perception is you're homeless because you won't work, you've never worked, those types of things, and that's certainly not true. For 50% of the women in this country who are homeless, they're homeless because they were victims of a crime, which is entirely different perspective, I think, than most of us view the homeless. Another startling statistic that I have is the amount of money that we spend in this country to shelter animals is 3 times what we spend to shelter women and children. And believe me, I love what the humane societies do in this country and the effort that's put forth for that activity. However, it's frightening to me that it's 3 times what we spend on human beings. And the question I get asked a lot, and I'm sure, Merryman, you have too over the years, is can abusers rehabilitate? And our statistics show that actually only 1 in 10 will actually accomplish the ability to rehabilitate. If you want to take just a minute, I do have some local statistics. I think we have a graphic. Just want to put those up on the screen if we could for just a minute and talk about them just briefly. We had 316 victims in shelter this past year. 266 of those were actually new victims. There's information there about the counseling that we do, and those numbers are actually have almost doubled actually in about the past year. The crisis calls that come into our office that are listed there are actually numbers that either come in on our local or our toll-free number. And crisis means that the other person at the end of the line is currently in a domestic violence situation. We get thousands of other telephone calls, but that's basically the number that we would consider in a crisis relationship at the time they make that call. Legal advocacy is a huge thing that we do where we actually accompany victims to court. We had 528 victims that we visited with this year. There were actually over 1,000 victims who pursued a domestic violence order this past year in the Purchase area. And 146 families dealing with domestic violence in their home actually received some kind of housing assistance or emergency assistance to relocate. That doesn't account for the 316 victims that were in shelter. That's an additional 146 who did not seek shelter but went to one of our outreach offices. So Merryman, that's where we are today, but I think it's important for all the viewers to know a little bit about our history. I know it dates back to the 70s, so if you could just tell them a little bit about where we are today and how we got to where we are.
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring out is, because I think there's been some confusion, we've had several names in our almost 30-year history. Merryman House is rather recent, and I do appreciate that. It's the greatest honor I've ever had. But we started out, I had formed a corporation, Women Aware Incorporated, so we went by that name for a while. But we were serving women from, well, mostly women, from Illinois, from Tennessee, from Missouri, from Kentucky, and mostly it was from Illinois, Missouri, and Kentucky. So we went by the name Tri-State until May of 1980. I got word from the Paducah Sun in this little clipping here that we had some money allotted to us in the Kentucky budget. So I danced a jig in the kitchen, but after we were getting money from Kentucky, they didn't particularly like it that we were called Tri-State. So we called ourselves PASAC, Purchase Area Spouse Abuse Center. Now there's another organization using that same set of letters, so it does get confusing. But the Women Aware corporation that I formed way back in the 70s is still the incorporation entity. All monies for Merryman House goes through that, and our 501c3 status was granted to that. But how we started, I had come back from living in Iran in 1974, and in 76, I believe it was, there was a not-for-credit course offered at what was then Paducah Community College, the West Kentucky Community and Technical College, called A Woman's Place, and the professor was Kathy Wood. You had to have 12 people in it for the class to make.
To count, yes.
So she recruited Larry, her husband, and he came and registered for the course. Well, some of the people dropped out, so we had a nice little intimate group. And when it was over, I wanted us to continue, but I had 2 young children, and nobody wanted to particularly pick up the ball. But a few months later, I did call people, and we got together, and we wrote letters to our legislators in Washington, D.C., mainly, and we wrote some to Frankfurt as well. And then in May of 77, we decided on a name, Women Aware, and then after that, one of the members of the group, Darlene Couch Marlowe, she helped write the incorporation papers. Very, very smart woman. She lives in California now. But we started out with 3 or 4 homes. My home was one of those. But we never had more than 3 or 4 homes because people, maybe the husband of the woman who had the home, didn't want that responsibility. It's a little bit scary. But my husband, Bill Kemp, he was very, very good about it, and so were my 2 boys. They might come home from school and they would be in one room together, and a woman and her children would be in other parts of the house, but they'd have to give up their bedroom for sure and bath. In any event, that's how we operated. The police had my phone number, and they would call me, and they were very glad to have something like that. Our first grant we got was from LEAA, a law enforcement agency that no longer exists, in Washington, D.C. They gave us our first grant. We hired a director in June the 23rd of 1980, the first time we had a director. I had been running things until then. And she carried a beeper 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Paducah Cooperative Ministry gave us office space, and that's how we operated. She stayed with us a year. I don't know how she lasted that long, but she left because she got married and moved away. And then we hired our second director. But basically, I can give you a lot more first, a lot more things as they came along. But we had, we had to, I decided I needed a board because we were being attacked in Frankfurt by the Eagle Forum types and things like that, who said we were destroying families. And so I asked Dr. Ron Kelly, and I asked Dr. Harold Clark, who's a veterinarian, and Candy Crabtree was her name at the time. No, King was her name at the time. It's Sanderson now, and she lives in Florida. And I needed and I asked Jack Johnson, who was a social worker, psychologist, and I needed a Methodist matron type, so I asked Doris Elrod. And they were my first board, just that few people, and they all worked tirelessly. We met in Ron Kelly's offices for a long time.
Well, was there any particular thing that you would consider pivotal, either negative or positive, in getting to, where we are today with a wonderful, 3-story home where we house women and have, I won't say sufficient funding, but definitely funding to do our work? Is there anything that you would think when you look back, gosh, that was a pivotal moment? Or
There's more than one, but the one that stands out the most is our funding ended at some point when Julia Cash Fowler, and she's gone back to using Cash as her last name now, was our director. We had at that time we had a small house on, I think it was North 12th Street. I went to help one Saturday in August. We had 32 people in that house. The fire marshal would have had a fit, and we only had one bathroom. There were a lot of children. But our grants ended, and we didn't have money. And Julia served for 4 months without a salary before we could get our funding and go on. We got our funding from a different source. And if she had not served without salary, we would have gone under, because the other agencies heard and they thought they had to quit sending us people to us, referrals, but we survived and went on. The community has been wonderful to us, and there have been anonymous donors. One woman was my neighbor on Jefferson Street, Lois Lepachinsky. She never said a word to me about this. We had worked together on the Jefferson Street Area Association. When she died, she left us money in her will, and she was the first one to do that. Yeah. But we've had many, many good things I could tell you about. Once we needed a chain link fence because we were at 21st in Kentucky, and the children, it was really
get in the street,
and it was easier for the abuser to come by and get them if they were playing out there with no fence. And one of the legislators from Louisville was here and was being interviewed on the radio, and she mentioned our need, and a local benefactor gave us that fence.
If there's one thing you would want the public now to do or to help with as far as our services are concerned, is there something particular that sticks out in your mind? Is it?
Well, this is not exactly a service, but the thing, and I know it's the same with you, people are still asking the wrong question. They ask, why doesn't she leave? The correct question is, why does he think it's okay to hit her? But as far as our the community support, if they'll pay attention to the wish list, but I always want books,
Yeah.
books to give to the children in the shelter.
Anything that we can do. Thank you so much, Merryman. I really appreciate your willingness to do this today. Of course, I have definitely a soft spot for you since your name is on the building and that you've just been so supportive of me personally in this role, and I just really appreciate. And we could probably pick your brain for hours about things that have happened in the history and good little stories that we could tell, but I really appreciate your time. We're going to go into a short break and we're going to put that relationship quiz up on the screen. So if you haven't gone and gotten a pencil and paper and you want to take just a second to do that, now's a good chance to do it. It's a fairly short quiz. The questions are pretty straightforward, and I'll give you a chance to do that. If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then you are in an abusive relationship. Obviously, some of these questions present more life-threatening situations than others. But if you answer yes to any of them, you don't deserve to be treated abusively. And today, we're here to talk with Jennifer W., as I promised earlier in the show. And she's going to share with some of you who may have answered yes to some of those questions, her experiences, her story. And I just want to thank you so much for being willing to come on and share your story, because I think it will offer a lot of hope and strength perhaps to someone who's out there listening today and watching our show. So if you would, Jennifer, I've known you now for a little over a year. If you could just tell the viewers today a little bit about what your life was like when you were living in a domestic violence relationship.
You can't explain what life is like living in a domestic violence situation. It's worse than a war. You just can't. It's unexplainable. It's miserable. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You don't know what to believe, who to believe. The abusers like to play mind games. They like to make it everything's your fault or nobody will believe you.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what it was like in the beginning, and then maybe where it was the day you made the phone call to Merryman House.
In the beginning,
if it's not too painful for you to talk about.
The day he tried to kill me, he left me for dead, but I couldn't leave. He had me really convinced that everything was my fault,
Mm-hmm.
and I was lost. So it took about a week after being severely beaten that I walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did, I called the Merryman House, and I came to the shelter. He showed up there, and they called the police. They had the fence. If it wasn't for the fence, he would have got me.
Okay.
And they moved me out of state, moved me back to Illinois, and I was there for 6 months when I was found there. So I went from Illinois to Indianapolis, where I was there for 2 weeks. I was found. He came to the shelter I was at there 12 times. I went from Indianapolis back to Kankakee, and then from Kankakee to Atlanta, where I was there for a year when he found me there. And now I'm here, back with the Merryman House, and he's been arrested. He's incarcerated for stalking, and I'm back on my life. I have my life. It's peace.
Tell me a little bit about what happened, and I think some people listening might want to know what happens when you make that phone call. What is it? What do the Merryman House people do? Just give them kind of a step-by-step. You called that 443-6001 number, and somebody said, "Hello, this is the Merryman House Domestic Crisis Center. How can I help you?" And then what happened after that?
You tell them what's going on. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You don't have no money. I had kids at the time. You're lost, but you're scared, and you're scared. You're afraid he's going to find out you called. They'll talk to you if you can talk. If you can't talk, they'll call you back, or they'll call they'll call the police for you if you want the police called. They'll send a cab to come and get you. Somebody will pick you. They'll get you away from the situation, but they're not going to force you to leave. They're going to counsel you, talk to you. It's your choice, but you need to know that love doesn't hurt.
Right.
And if he loves you, he wouldn't do it to you.
Right. Well, Merryman mentioned earlier some of the living conditions that were available to women leaving domestic violence situations in the past. Share with the viewers a little bit about what it's like to live at the Merryman House now.
I talk to a lot of ladies where I live at, and everybody seems to think that the women's shelter is a homeless shelter, which it isn't a homeless shelter. The staff is great. I have never met another staff like this before. They're wonderful. They work with you, and they'll give you anything you need. They're there to help you. Living with women is hard. I mean, it's hard to live with women. It's hard to, even if you have your own place, to have somebody living with you. It's hard. And when you have a full house, it's hard with kids. And everybody's different, how they are, and you're in my space, or you know, but it's safe. You have food, you have electricity, you don't have no violence, you don't have no fears. You don't have to worry about it. Did you not sweep the floor right, or did you burn supper, or is the canned food's not straight?
Yeah.
You don't have no fear. You don't have no worries.
Well, one of the things that I know that you had access to while you were in shelter was individual counseling sessions and some of the group sessions. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship that you developed with your advocate and what that was like? The good, bad, all of it, I guess.
I had relationships with everybody. A lot of the staff there become real good friends with. I know we don't visit on the outsides, but I can talk to them, and I still call and talk to them. You're always going to need somebody, but they're helpful. Talk about anything. There is nothing you can't talk to them about.
So you felt a really openness that maybe you had not had in the past to talk about even things beyond the abuse.
People don't understand abuse.
Right.
If you haven't been in it, you can't tell me you know about it. And some of these women that are working there have been through it or have seen it and know it. They understand.
Okay.
They listen.
And there was all age ranges when you were there at the shelter. I was trying to remember.
There was young girls, 18 years old, and then there was old women that shouldn't be going through this.
Right.
I mean, your grandma.
Well, the most important thing I think for you to tell people about today is what your life is like now. That you're out of the shelter, you're on your own, and you truly are he's incarcerated. All the steps have been taken to lock him up with your help and then the help of other women that he abused through the years. He's going to be in jail for a really long time. And we'd like to know what your life is like now that you can truly live free of domestic violence.
It's so peaceful. I can't explain it. I've never had peace like this. I grew up with domestic violence, with my stepdad killing my mom, and then my marriage. It's peaceful. I've never in my life had peace. I can breathe.
Okay. Lost that suffocating,
and
scary feeling.
It's my home. I love my home. I take pride in my home. It's a peace.
Right.
Can't explain it no better than that.
Are you starting to feel more secure when you go out, and start getting jobs and working out in the? Have you lost that having to look over your shoulder kind of feeling?
I have. I'll always have it with me because I know one day he will be out again in public, but I'm not scared of him anymore. I'm not scared of him. I'm not going to let him run my life. And that's what they do. Even if when you do leave, they control you. They try to control you with the fear of them coming back. I don't have that fear no more.
Okay.
I leave my windows open, or if I want to open my doors, I open my doors.
So just some of the little things that most of us take for granted, you're feeling comfortable.
They don't know.
Yeah.
It's again, if you haven't been
Especially
through
this
it,
time of year when you really want to have your windows open and your front door open.
it's peaceful. I'm at peace.
It's not
I'm not scared of anything. I'm not scared.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your willingness to come on today, and I think anybody who finds themselves in Jennifer's position should give us a call. Our local number is 443-6001, or if you happen to be out of the local calling area, it's 1-800-585-2686. As Jennifer mentioned, we are a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week shelter. We have full-time staff there all the time, and right now we have a house that will house up to 35 people. So we have continual needs of things that I guess you would just, if you can imagine having 35 people in your own home, the types of things that we go through on a pretty regular basis. When the victims come into our shelter, they're given a personal care kit. I don't know if you can even remember at that point,
The
you may have
deodorant,
been. It's got just a little
shampoo.
bit of everything that you might need that you would put in your suitcase if you were just going to go on a weekend trip somewhere. It's got the toothpaste, the toothbrush, hairbrush, shampoo, deodorant, those types of things you would pack.
I remember when I got there, I didn't have shoes. I didn't have shoes. I didn't have a coat because I left with nothing, and I didn't have clothes.
Right.
And you helped me. You helped me a lot.
So before we leave today, if there's one thing, of course, we're always more than happy to take cash donations, and those can be mailed to Post Office Box 98 in Paducah, Kentucky. But if you are inclined, we do have a wish list that we keep and we maintain on a regular basis that lists the things that we desperately need just for the day-to-day operation of the shelter. So if your church group, your civic club, or just you as an individual are interested in helping out the Merryman House and people like Jennifer, who, like she said, came with no shoes, no winter coat, those types of things, we do have a list, I think, that we're going to put up on the screen of some things that we would like for you to see. And we thank you very much for this opportunity to come into your home and to talk about a situation that's usually one that most people don't have a dinner conversation over. And we thank you very much. Thank you again,
Just
Jennifer.
remember,